really interesting article in the Washington Post from a professor at Yale University, John Bart. Now, he did a study with fellow researchers. It's going to be in the new issue of European Journal of Social Psychology. But in this article, he talks about some things that scientists knew before, and then gets to the study and what they learned recently. And this is about how conservatives and liberals think differently. In fact, our brains are wired a little bit differently. This is really interesting, and it helps you figure out what motivates conservatives in this case. So he explains, over a decade now of research in political psychology consistently shows that how physically threatened or fearful a person feels is a key factor, although clearly not the only one, in whether he or she holds conservative or liberal attitudes. That's fascinating. So it turns out whether you're more afraid or not is going to determine whether you're conservative or liberal. Now, conservatives are pretty good at marketing, so they've said all along, liberals are wimps and they're, pushovers, and conservatives are strong. Now let's find out if that's true. Conservatives, it turns out, react more strongly to physical threat than liberals do. In fact, their greater concern with physical safety seems to be determined early in life. And this is amazing, listen to this. In one University of California study, the more fear a 4-year-old showed in a laboratory situation, the more conservative his or her political attitudes were found to be 20 years later. Turns out, conservatives are hardwired to be afraid. So the people who are more fearful wind up becoming conservative. And when you think about it, it makes all the sense in the world. What is the primary motivation for conservatives? I'm afraid of immigrants. I'm afraid of terrorism. I'm afraid of crime. I'm afraid of drugs. I'm afraid of the God upstairs. I'm afraid of everything. They're driven by fear. Oh, the gays, I'm so afraid of them. I need my gun, I'm so afraid, I'm afraid. Everything is fear, fear, fear. Listen to this, brain imaging studies have even shown that the fear center of the brain, the amygdala, is actually larger in conservatives than in liberals. So if you're not into a conservative, have a little bit of sympathy for them. Their brain is actually structured so that they're constantly afraid. Now, it's a little different, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but the studies have borne it out, and on average, this is the conservative mind. So look, you can look at it two ways. One is, well, no wonder they're cowards. The other way you can look at it as a liberal and a progressive is our poor brothers and sisters. They can't help it. They were born with a different brain that makes them afraid of everything. By the way, step one in recovery is knowing what's wrong with you. And so conservatives, I'm here to help you. Politicians take advantage of an innate fear that you have to drive you to the wrong conclusions. So for example, you're worried about that the rules have been rigged against you. That you're right about. Liberals are worried about it, conservatives are worried about it. That actually is logical. Now, who do you think rigged them? Republicans will take advantage of your fear and say, it's the immigrants, the dirty immigrants coming into the country. Some of them are criminals and rapists, you gotta watch out. Wait a minute, the guy who just crossed the border from Mexico with nothing, who's gonna work his ass off to try to scrape together a little bit of money to send back to his family, that's the guy who rigged the rules? How in the world could he do that? He has no power. Don't look down, look up. They manipulate your fear to take advantage of you and lead you in the wrong direction. Now, the details of the study that they did is also fascinating. So listen to this, they were trying to see, can you push conservatives to be more progressive depending on the situation at hand? So they explain now. And there were a number of researchers here, it's just Professor Barg writing about it in this case. But before, so they asked them a bunch of questions, but before they answered the survey questions, we had them engage in an intense imagination exercise. They were asked to close their eyes and richly imagine being visited by a genie who granted them a superpower. For half of our participants, this superpower was to be able to fly under one's own power. For the other half, it was to be completely physically safe, invulnerable to any harm. If they had just imagined being able to fly, their responses to social attitude survey showed the usual clear difference between Republicans and Democrats. The former endorsed more conservative positions on social issues and were also more resistant to social change in general. But if they had instead just imagined being completely physically safe, the Republicans became significantly more liberal. Their positions on social attitudes were much more like the Democratic respondents. And on the issue of social change in general, the Republicans' attitudes were now indistinguishable from the Democrats. That's amazing. As long as you get a conservative to feel safe, he actually has the same positions as a progressive. So more details on this. Imagining being completely safe from physical harm had done what no experiment had done before. It had turned conservatives into liberals. Look, I said this on an earlier show, and I had seen similar studies to this before, and that's what I base it on. This is just an amazing new one that buttresses the point that the number one thing that drives conservatives is fear, and people objected and said, no, hatred, etc. No, it's not the hatred nearly as much as the fear. It's the fear that gets them to go, I'm scared of the others, it must be the others. And what do the politicians do? They feed into that. The Southern strategy, the anti-immigrant stand, the anti-Muslim stand, they're coming to get you, the Sharia law is gonna take over Oklahoma. I mean, that is so preposterous, but it is designed to trigger the conservative mind into more fear, and hence voting Republican. Now, in fact, anti-immigration attitudes, Professor Barg explains, are also linked directly to the underlying basic drive for physical safety. For centuries, arch conservative leaders have often referred to scapegoated minority groups as, quote, germs or, quote, bacteria that seek to invade and destroy the country from within. And you study any history and you'll see that that's exactly right, and it happens all across the world. We reasoned making people feel safer about a dangerous flu virus should serve to calm their fears about immigrants, and making them feel more threatened by the flu virus should cause them to be more against immigration than they were before. In a 2011 study, my colleagues and I showed just that. First, we reminded our nationwide sample of liberals and conservatives about the threat of the flu virus during the H1N1 epidemic, and then measured their attitudes toward immigration. Afterward, we simply asked them if they'd already gotten their flu shot or not. It turned out that those who had not gotten a flu shot, feeling threatened, expressed more negative attitudes towards immigration, while those who had received the vaccination, feeling safe, had more positive attitudes about immigration. Now, my favorite is the final part of the study, or the final study in this situation. In another study, using hand sanitizer after being warned about the flu virus had the same effect on immigration attitudes as had being vaccinated. A simple squirt of Purell after we had raised the threat of the flu had changed their minds. It made them feel safe from the dangerous virus, and this made them feel socially safe from immigrants as well. It's amazing how the human mind works. A little bit of Purell, and all of a sudden they're like, immigrants aren't so bad. A lot of this stuff is not thought consciously. Of course not. A conservative doesn't get a little bit of hand sanitizer and go, that's it, I'm a liberal now. He doesn't consciously think that, but subconsciously, that is the effect that it has. Amazing. So I think that if we want to have more advancement, and more important than anything else, rational decision making in our government, what we need to do is take the fear out. Take the money out, but we also need to take the fear out. And if you do it, and if you expose the Republican tricks to try to lead people in the wrong direction, I think you'll be shocked at what a percentage of the country becomes more and more progressive. So at least now you know, and that's the beginning of fixing the problem. If you like this video, bless your heart. We got a lot more where that came from. We do a full show every day, Monday through Friday. Come enjoy it ad-free by becoming a member, tytnetwork.com/join.